Welcome to your new home. I hope that you enjoy living here. I just wanted to let you know how special you are. Mrs. Craig smiled at me, then gave me a hug. Hi, my name is Tiffany. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Press the notification button so that you would be the first to see when new content comes out. After you have done that, go and hug your family and tell them that you love them, because not everyone has a loving family. I had been back at Mrs. Silver's orphanage about a year when she called me into the office and said that someone wanted to adopt me. She said that they looked like a nice couple and they didn't have any children. I thought that at the age of 13, nobody wanted to adopt me. Boy, was I wrong, and the thought of having my own space was surreal. That night, I had the most restful night I've had in a long time. The next day, Mrs. Silvers took me to the doctor's office, and I got some blood tests done. I had never been adopted before, so I thought it was standard procedure. As a matter of fact, I would have done anything not to be placed with a foster family again. I never knew my mom, and some days I wish she was around, and I comforted myself by thinking she probably had a good reason for giving up. Doesn't every mother? About 2 weeks after Mrs. Silvers told me that I was getting adopted, it was finally time for me to leave the orphanage. Hopefully, this time for good. When I got to the home of Mr. and Mrs. Craig, I was given the tour around the house. "This is your room, Tiffany," Mrs. Craig said as she opened the door. "But you can't redecorate it." There were portraits on the wall of a girl. She looked around 16 years old. Trophies and medals adorned the room, each one holding the name Zakiya Craig. They must have lost their daughter. It made sense that Mrs. Craig wouldn't want the room to be redecorated. The next few days were simple enough. I really didn't have anything to do since Mr. and Mrs. Craig did all the housework and cooking. Mr. and Mrs. Craig even told me that I could call them Mom and Dad if it was something I felt comfortable doing. So I did. Every day, Mom told me that I was special, and it really meant a lot to me after being told that I wouldn't amount to anything and that if my mom didn't want me, why would anyone else? Mrs. Craig showered me with gifts and made my favorite meals. One night I was sitting in bed reading a book when I heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I said. Mom came into the room bearing gifts of a tray of chocolate chip cookies and a glass of milk. She placed the tray on the nightstand. "How are you enjoying it here?" Mom asked as she sat next to me on the bed. "I'm very happy," I said. Then she said something that sounded a bit off. "You know that you're now a part of the family. And in families, we need to look out for each other. Sometimes that looks like sacrificing a part of ourselves to help other members of the family." Before I could respond, she kissed me on the forehead and exited my bedroom. The next day around 4 p.m., Mom turned to me and said, "Tiffany, honey, I need you to get dressed. Dad and I have an outing that we would like to take you on." I was excited. We really had not been to anywhere besides the supermarket, and I was happy to see walls other than that of the house. We left the house around 5:15 p.m., and my excitement faded when I realized the tension that filled the space within the car. I felt as though something was wrong or was about to go wrong. After a very quiet 2-hour drive, we finally pulled into the parking lot of St. Andrew's Private Hospital. I followed my parents in, and they led us to a room that held one patient. The person in the bed was hooked up to tubes and machines. I recognized her as the girl in the photo. She was Zakiya, Mom and Dad's daughter. I gasped. All this time I assumed she was dead. Why didn't they ever mention her to me? A man in a long white coat walked into the room and interrupted my thoughts. The doctor said, "This must be Tiffany. You are doing such a great thing." "A great thing? What great thing am I doing?" I asked with a puzzled expression on my face. He looked at me and said, "You don't think that giving one of your kidneys to Zakiya is a great thing? Mr. and Mrs. Craig were very lucky to find a match." I placed my hand over my mouth and gasped as my eyes grew wide in disbelief. When I did speak, my voice shook. "A kidney? Nobody told me anything about a kidney." "You must be mistaken. I'm Tiffany, Mr. and Mrs. Craig's adopted daughter. I'm not a kidney donor." The doctor turned to Mr. and Mrs. Craig as he completely ignored the words that were just spoken and said, "We have Tiffany's room all prepared. Zakiya is able to do another surgery, so the surgery will take place tomorrow." He nodded to my parents and exited the room. "Mom, please don't let them do this to me," I pleaded. Mrs. Craig was no longer the sweet, loving, adopted mom that I knew and grew to love. In her place stood a cold and harsh woman who grabbed my shoulders roughly and snarled, "You have 2 choices, Tiffany. You can 1, do the surgery, or 2, Go back to the orphanage and let them put you in another foster home, and this time, I'll make sure that you stay there." She let go of my shoulders and smiled at me as the nurse entered the room. "Remember, we are now family, and family makes sacrifices for its members." As I sat in the hospital bed dressed in hospital garb, tears flowed. I decided to do the surgery. I did not want to go back to foster care. If giving a kidney meant that I would never have to go back, then I guess I was left with no choice. The next morning, I was wheeled into the operation room around 5 a.m. After surgery, I was in and out of consciousness. From the conversations I heard, the surgery was successful and everyone thought I was such a brave little girl for doing what I did. Zakaya had been searching for a kidney match for 3 years, and finally it happened. I also knew that I was not the only child that gave a kidney to Zakaya. About 2 weeks after surgery, I was allowed to go home. However, I wasn't allowed to go back to the room that I previously occupied. I was taken to a much smaller room that held a dresser, a bed, and a desk and chair, and luckily a computer. I was home most of the time, alone, since the Craigs were in the hospital with Zakaya. One night, right before going to bed, I took my painkillers and settled under my blankets. I swore I saw movement outside my window, but I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. I closed my eyes and drifted off into a dreamless sleep. Being home after the surgery exposed that the Craigs already got what they wanted from me. The love and affection that I once got was no longer there. Once Zakaya was in the clear, my new family completely forgot about me. It also meant that privileges such as watching TV with the family and even going out to dinner with the family was no more. I now became the outcast. This meant I spent most of my time in my room, surfing the web and watching movies. I only left my room when it was necessary. It somehow became my solitude. Once when the Craigs went to dinner, I was in my room when I heard a tap, tap, tap coming from the window behind my drawn curtains. At first I thought it was a figment of my imagination, but the tapping got louder and faster. My eyes grew wide and I felt as though I was going in slow motion as I moved ahead to the curtain to see what was behind it. My hands grabbed the curtain and quickly pulled it to the side to see what was making the noise. Mr. Craig's voice behind me startled me. "Tiffany, why are you still up? You should be in bed." I jumped in fright, and a short scream escaped my lips. I placed my hand on my chest to steady my racing heart. I thought I heard something coming from outside. "It's probably the wind shaking the window panes." Mr. Craig smiled at me. He handed me a disposable food container and then winked at me before leaving the room. If it wasn't for the small humane gestures of Mr. Craig from time to time, living with the Craigs would have been unbearable, especially since Zakaya inherited her mother's charming demeanor. Over the next few months, I felt as though someone was constantly looking over my shoulder, but every time I turned around, nobody was there. So walking to and from school was quite nerve-wracking. Once while heading home from school, I guess I zoned out because one minute I was crossing the road and next I was being tackled to the ground before a car zoomed past. Before I could regain my senses and thank the person who saved my life, they just disappeared. One evening while watering the plants, I heard a noise from behind the tree. Now, if you are thinking that I went to check out what that noise was, I didn't. I dropped the watering can and ran inside the house. The Craigs were out for the evening, so I ran through the house frantically, making sure all the windows and doors were locked. Next, I ran into my room, locked the door and hid into the closet. But after about 10 minutes, I heard the same tapping noise on the window behind the curtain. Tap, 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 tap. I felt as though with every second that passed, it grew louder and louder until it was the only thing that I heard. I came to the conclusion that this was how I was going to die. I gingerly opened the closet door and walked slowly towards the curtain. I expected, or rather hoped, Mr. Craig would walk in like last time, but that didn't happen. I peeked behind the curtain and I was astonished to see what was outside my window making the tapping sound. It was a woman. My jaw dropped. It was a woman who looked just like me, but of course older. She wore a black coat with a hoodie. Mustering all my courage, I moved the curtain to one side and looked at the reflection of myself outside the window. The woman smiled and I noticed tears swell in her eyes. "Hi, Tiffany," she said. "I'm your mother." She said she got pregnant when she was 16. On the day that her baby was born, her mother placed the baby up for adoption. She said that she had been looking for me for years, but every time she found me, I had already left the foster care I was in. It was a lot to take in. After our nightly cap by my bedroom window, she said goodbye, and that she would see me soon. Over the next few weeks, my mother and I got acquainted. We knew that they would never award her full custody of me since she did not make enough money. After 3 years of being mistreated, I ran away from the Craigs and went to live with my mother. That night while slipping out of my bedroom window, Mr. Craig entered my room. I was frozen with fear, thinking he would raise an alarm. He smiled at me and nodded, and I smiled back, and I slipped out the window to go meet my mother. Nobody came after me or came looking for me. No alerts were put out. It seemed as though I became a ghost. I had been living with my mother about 7 years when we were heading out of town. Along the way, we saw a crowd along the road, and we found out that there was an accident. My mom and I stepped out of the car because the road was blocked, so we couldn't pass anyway. As they were placing people on the stretchers, I recognized that it was the Craigs. I really had mixed feelings about this. On one hand, I wanted to be empathetic, but on the other hand, I was like, Karma was serving her dish today. Then my thoughts ran on about Mr. Craig and how he made my stay a little better while I lived with him. I asked a paramedic which hospital they were being taken to. Once I got my answer, I asked my mom if we'd go to the hospital, and she said no problem. When we got to the hospital, we entered and spoke with the receptionist. My mother told her that we were family with the Craigs and that we would like to be updated on their status as soon as possible. The receptionist nodded and asked us to wait in the waiting area. After about 3 hours, the doctor came out. Family members of the Craig family? He said. My mom and I stood up and answered. Yes.
Answer the question.
I'm sorry to say that we lost Nakaya and Juliet in surgery. He said. How is Mr. Craig? I blurted out. He'll be fine. We had to put pins in his legs. He has 2 broken ribs and a mild concussion, but he will be okay. You can come back tomorrow when he's allowed visitors. The doctor said. My mother and I thanked him and exited the hospital. The next day, we visited the hospital, and I walked in with flowers for Mr. Craig. He apologized for what his wife did to me all those years ago, and he thanked us for coming by to visit him. That one visit turned out to be many visits. My mom and I helped Mr. Craig any way we could, including helping him to and from therapy once he got out of the hospital. He and my mom got close, and 5 years later, they are about to get married. My life may not have started off the best, but it's not where you start. It's where you allow yourself to end up.
I just started college and everything was going well. I'd been saving since leaving high school 2 years ago, and finally, here I was. What could go wrong? Well, a lot, apparently. On my second day as a freshman, I got a call from my mom. She was crying when I picked up. Mom, come on, I've only been gone like 2 days. Pull yourself together. Aria, sweetie, I've got cancer. You need to come home. And just like that, all my dreams of becoming a doctor were shattered in one single phone call. I packed up and left without even saying goodbye to my siblings. My mom needed the money I'd saved to pay for the treatment, and I needed to get home to her quickly. I wouldn't be able to cope if she didn't survive. I got one of the last train tickets and ran on with all of my luggage. There was one seat left next to a pretty snobby-looking woman. I sat down and watched as she actually moved away from me, like I smelled that or something. She was on the phone and speaking really loudly, complaining about having to ride the train with a bunch of peasants, and that it was just unacceptable that the private jet wasn't available. On her other side was a girl who must have been her daughter. She looked upset, and the woman kept telling her to shut up and stop being a baby. Suddenly, the train started making weird noises, and the girl started crying. I thought her mom was gonna slap her. Everyone started shifting in their seats, and I was worried we were about to break down or something. I have no idea why, but the snobby mom stood up and used this opportunity to go and use the bathroom. Her daughter was seriously freaking out now, and I felt so bad for her. I slid over to her and gave her a hug, and that was when an explosion happened. The last thing I remember was the girl I was hugging, screaming, and then darkness. The next moment, I was waking up in a hospital bed, wrapped up in bandages from head to toe. Every part of my body felt broken, and when I tried to move, I wanted to scream in pain, but I couldn't even speak. It felt like there was something lodged in my throat. My voice was gone. I could hear people screaming all around me, and then a man's voice said, "Do whatever you can to save her, please." I didn't know who it was. I felt so confused. I tried to get the nurse's attention, but she just fed me medicine to calm me down. I couldn't even see, and the dizziness was crazy. I must have fallen asleep, because after a while I woke up, and I had no clue how much time had passed. There was was a doctor standing over me, and he said my vocal cords were severely damaged, and he didn't know when or if I'd ever speak again. Most of my bandages were off now, and I was able to sit up. Finally, I was being released, and I couldn't wait to see my mom. But where was she? There was a man waiting for me by the door, and I tried to ask the doctor who he was, but of course I couldn't speak. He took me by the hand and led me out to a car. I assumed he was driving me home to my mom, but instead we pulled up outside a huge mansion, and then he said, "Welcome home." What? I didn't understand. This guy was speaking English. Who was he? He gave me a key and showed me to a room and told me that this was my room now. Then he looked at me and told me not to expect him to want to stay in the same room anymore. Then he left me standing there. I was so scared. What was he planning to do to me? I walked toward the door which led to the bathroom, and for the first time since the accident, I looked at myself in the mirror. I slowly peeled the bandages off and was horrified when I saw my face. I looked nothing like myself. What had they done to my face? I mean, don't get me wrong, I looked good. I looked pretty, but I didn't even resemble my old self in the slightest. I started to panic and decided all I needed was to call my mom. I ran out of the room and down the hall to find the man who brought me there. He was sitting on a big sofa, and I tried to use sign language to ask him for a phone, but he didn't move. He just sat there grinning at me. Then he laughed and said, "After what happened, there's no way you'll be using a phone again." Then he shooed me off like I was a dog or something. But I refused to budge. I kept staring at him, and then he said that even though I'd been through a traumatizing accident and had to undergo lots of surgery, he wasn't going to forgive me for what I'd done. I stared at him, and then he continued and said the only reason he was letting me live here was because I protected our daughter when the train accident happened. Our daughter? What was he talking about? I was only 20, and I definitely didn't have a daughter with this man. I grabbed a pen and paper and wrote, "I don't understand where I am or who you are. I started screaming, but again, no sound came out. I was hysterical, begging him to give me a phone, but instead he just sat me down and then called the doctor. I got up and stormed to the front door. I needed to leave this place, but suddenly the security guard stopped me and forced me to go back inside. Later that night, a doctor arrived and examined me and said I was clearly very distressed after such a traumatic experience, and that perhaps I was having some memory loss. And so it continued. For the next few months, I was under constant supervision from a whole bunch of doctors and psychiatrists. I never gave up on trying to get to the phone, but after sneaking out of my room one night to try and find the man's phone, he caught me, and after that, my room was locked at night. I felt like a prisoner. I gave up all hope of ever getting out of there, and had to constantly listen to the man telling me how I was a cheater and how he'd never get over me having an affair with his best friend. One day, he was sitting next to me telling me how awful I was, and I was feeling really frustrated. I opened my mouth to try and shout, and suddenly, sound came out. My voice was back. It sounded weird at first, but slowly it came back, and the man said I sounded different, and that I should shut up and stop speaking, but I couldn't stop. I asked him to tell me what had happened to me exactly. He said we were supposed to meet at the train station so we could sign the divorce papers, after he found out that I had cheated on him with his best friend. But then an accident happened. The railway line was broken, and it caused the train to slide off the tracks and hit the center wall. 5 people had died, and the rest were seriously hurt, especially after the fire started. He then told me that if I hadn't been holding his daughter, it would have been impossible to recognize who I was from the way I looked after the accident. Suddenly, it clicked. The snobby woman next to me on the train had been his wife, so she must have died. And everyone thought I was her. But this was insane. I tried to tell him my story, that I wasn't his wife, but he didn't believe me, and honestly, I was exhausted by it all now. He said that he was done with my lies, and that I had to face up to the truth of what I'd done, instead of pretending to be someone else. It was hopeless. But then, as soon as he went away on a work trip, I stole some of his money, and I gave $400 to one of his house servants in exchange for a short phone call. Luckily, he agreed to let me use his phone for 5 minutes. I again, and then tried every other number I knew by heart. I needed to speak to someone. Anyway, finally, after almost giving up, I answered. When I said it was Arya speaking, she started wailing. Then she asked if it was a prank and said Arya had died months ago in a train accident. But I told her it was me, and even sang a song to her that she always sang to me when I was a kid. She burst into tears and said everyone thought I was dead. Then I learned the truth, that I'd been presumed dead for 8 months now. 8 months! I was so shocked, but all I could think about was my mom. I asked to speak to her, and the line went quiet. "Auntie?" I said, and then I knew. I heard the sobs, and I knew. She died. My mom had died. And all because of me. After she heard of my death, she refused treatment and said what was the point in living when she'd lost her daughter? She might as well die too. And that's what happened. While I was sobbing on the phone, my greedy aunt started telling me that the courtroom had transferred all of my mom's inheritance to her, since they thought I was dead. However, dear, I don't think that giving you any of that money back will be an option, because my husband and I... But I just hung up the phone. I'd never liked that woman anyway, or any of my relatives for that matter. They were the exact opposite of my mom. She didn't even care to ask where I was. I had no one left in this world. I had nowhere to go and no one to help me. I was all alone. And so I decided to stay in this house with my alleged husband and pretend to get my memory back and admit that I'm his wife until I figured out what to do. Every day after he left for work, I'd sneak into his office and steal some money. And then in the evenings, I'd act like everything was normal. I'd cook dinner and we'd sit together and try and be civil. And slowly but surely, it felt like we really were married. His name was Nathan, and he began to trust me a little more every day. He let me go out, gave me a phone, and he wasn't mean to me anymore. When I had enough money to leave, I decided to stay for a little while longer because I kind of liked his company. So I kept putting off my escape, and then before I knew it, another 6 months had passed. I knew I was doing something wrong by living this fake life, but to be honest, I couldn't leave because I developed feelings for him. I started doing little things to make it up to him. I didn't want him to think that I cheated on him. I had to really pretend to be a good wife to make him happy. I left him love letters near his bed in the morning. I made him breakfast, and I showed him how much I cared about him. Until one day, he went to stay with him. I was so in love, and I felt like I was living the best days of my life. Until a month later, when the biggest reality check hit me smack bang in the face, I discovered I was pregnant. I felt so guilty and realized I had to tell Nathan the truth. I was scared, but I sat with him one day. Nathan was shocked. He looked so sad and it broke my heart. He said he should have realized sooner that I wasn't his wife and that this was a huge mess up. I didn't know what to say, so I packed and left. He didn't stop me. I didn't tell him I was pregnant because I knew it would bring him even more pain. I used the rest of the money I'd taken from him to rent a small apartment nearby. I decided that I was going to start a new life with my baby. But a week later, Nathan was knocking at my door. I had no idea how he found me, but he stood there and told me he loved me, and that he couldn't forget that it had been me holding his daughter in the accident, that it was me who saved her, not her mother. He then said that it was true that I wasn't who he thought I was, but he couldn't deny that he'd never felt this happy in his life. And then he got down on one knee and asked if I wanted to be his wife. I smiled and said yes. This man had saved me. Without him, I'd have no one. I told him I was pregnant, and then I showed him a photo of what I looked like before the accident. He grinned and said, "Our baby is going to be a real cutie." So now I'm going to have a baby, and I'm going back to college to continue my studies. Plus, I have a fiance. It's been quite a journey, but I guess it all worked out in the end.
Hi, my name is Anna, and I'm from Sweden. Please like and subscribe. I used to live with my mom and my 5 other siblings in an age-old house that looked haunted. And my mom is no less than a witch. Where the heck is everyone? This house is a mess. I'm out for like 30 minutes and you turn it into a pigsty. Well, having 6 kids was no joke, but I was the oldest one, and when anything bad happened, it was all on me. My diamond ring is missing. Who took it? Everyone pointed at me like I was some thief. No, Mom, I didn't even see it. Oh, so now you're blind? No, I just didn't see it. And since when are we so rich that we have diamonds? You don't even have a job. But Mom looked super mad about it. She turned the whole place upside down, only to find it in my youngest sister's diaper the next day. And for some freaking reason, she blamed it on me. You fed her the ring. I can't believe you do that to a baby. Mom, that's crazy. Why would I do that? She glared at me like a raging bull, but then she went ahead and cleaned the ring with a tissue and put it on her finger. Oh, my precious. Ugh, what a psycho. Sometimes I doubted if she was even my mom. Then one day when I was 14, I saw her taking money from some old woman. I stepped closer to hear them, and what I heard next shocked me. I don't care about the money. You can have as much as you want. Just keep that child away from my family like you've done for 14 years. 14 years? And child? Could it be that she was talking about me? Was I adopted? I had to find out the truth. After the old woman left, I confronted Mom. Mom, who was that woman? And why did you take money from her? And what child was she talking about? Ugh, nothing. She's just an old woman who helps me feed you brats. Do you think it's easy for a hot, single woman like me to survive on my own, huh? Go back and clean some dishes, now. Ugh, she was clearly hiding something, and I had to find out what. I kept an eye on Mom after that, and the next month, I saw her taking money from the same old woman again. If Mom wasn't gonna tell me, I was gonna find out the truth from the old woman, myself. After Mom went back inside the house, I secretly got into the trunk of the old woman's car and followed her all the way to her place. And God, this place was huge! As soon as I got out, some guards held me for trespassing, and the old woman looked at me like she'd seen some ghost. You, what are you doing here? How did you even? Suddenly she pulled me to the side and went all bonkers on me. I know why you're here, but I won't let you destroy my family. If you go anywhere near my daughter and reveal the fact that you're her daughter, you're done for. OMG, what? I was her daughter's daughter? She was my grandmother? This was insane. I have a different mom other than my crazy mom? No wonder my fake mom treated me like garbage. I was in complete shock, but just then, she started pushing me out the gate. Go away. Go back to where you came from, or I'm going to lock you up in the dark. What were these kiddish threats? I lived with a psycho woman all my life. I wasn't afraid of anyone. I pushed her away and ran inside the house in search of my real mom and screamed loudly, "Mom!" Suddenly, a gorgeous-looking lady sitting on the sofa looked at me in complete shock. And surprisingly, I looked just like her. She was definitely my mom. Who are you, kid? I'm the daughter you gave away 14 years back. Gave away? What are you saying? I have no idea. So you didn't give birth to me 14 years back? Oh my God. But how? How is this possible? She looked just as shocked as I was, but then suddenly she came and hugged me. I can't believe this. You look just like me. But the doctors told me you were a stillborn child. Where were you all this time, and how did you find me? But before I could say anything, Granny pulled me away. Oh, you're scaring the poor child with so many questions. She looks so tired. Come on, I'll show you your room. She quickly took me into the giant room and pushed me onto the bed. So it was you. You told Mom I was a stillborn child and kept me away from her all these years? Why did you do that? It's good enough that I'm allowing a rat like you to stay in this palace. And now what? You need answers too? Listen to me, kid. Keep your mouth shut and do as I say, or I'll stop sending money to your family and all your little siblings will starve. What an evil witch! I decided to keep quiet for the time being and find out what was really going on. Later that evening, when I went down for dinner, I learned I had a sister, Maria, who was a year younger than me. Mom invited me to sit down next to her and started asking me again how I'd found her, with Granny glaring at me. I made up a story about how I'd traced my family history on a website. That sounds like complete rubbish. What website? Get a DNA test and prove it. No, that's not needed. I know she's my daughter. Look at her. She's every bit like me. We don't need any proof. Suddenly, Maria dropped a bowl of soup all over me. Oh, I'm so washroom. She took my hand and walked towards the washroom. But the minute we entered it, she turned into Satan. This time, it was just a bowl of soup. Next time, it'll be you, in a pot of hot boiling soup. If you don't leave this place right now. Oh my God, this house was full of psychos. But what Maria said was right. I had to get the DNA test done just to verify things. And indeed, I was her daughter. But I still didn't know if she was a good one. Then one night, as I was lying in my bed, Mom came into my room and started talking to me about her life. At first, I was hesitant, but she was just so sweet. Don't mind Maria if she's cold to you. She's just really attached to me. She'll be fine. And honey, I'm so glad to have you back in my life. Suddenly, I had tears in my eyes. For the first time ever, I knew what it felt like to have a loving mother, and she was just awesome. But my happiness was short-lived because Mom was going out on a business trip for some time, and that meant I was stuck with Granny and my evil sister now. At school, she was like the boss of the bullies. Once, she saw a girl wearing the same dress as her, and she said, "How dare you try to wear the same dress as me?" Saying that, she grabbed the girl's dress and tore it to pieces in the corridor full of students. What a witch! Later, after school, she and her minions surrounded me on the playground and started throwing balls at me. "Dodge this, moron! You think you can come into my life and take away everything from me? Including my mom? In your dreams, jerk!" That was it. I grabbed a ball and threw it right in her face. She fell to the ground on her butt. "I have no interest in what's yours, Maria, but I'll rightfully take what belongs to me. And don't you dare think for a second that I'm weak." I picked up my things and went back home, but I knew trouble was coming. A few days later, I was called to the principal's office, and she said I was being suspended for bullying. What? I didn't do anything. I don't even know anyone here yet. Why would I bully anyone? And that's when Maria came into her office looking like a mummy. "I'm the one that you bullied and then hit brutally. What the heck?" She was such a drama queen. I tried to explain the situation to the principal, but she didn't listen to what I said. I stormed out of there in anger and went back home. But then suddenly a maid came running to me, saying Mom was back and she wanted to see me in her room. I went upstairs, but there was no one. And then I saw her cupboard open and jewels scattered on the floor. I quickly went ahead to pick them up when suddenly Maria and Granny barged into the room along with Mom. I knew it. You're no more than a low-life thief who wants to steal all our riches. Now you're gonna serve in jail, Anna. What? Are you crazy? I was just picking them up to steal them and then sell them. We know who you are, and we also know that you're not my granddaughter. With that, Granny took out some piece of paper and shoved it in my face. It's a DNA test that proves you're not my granddaughter. So none of your lies are going to work now, liar. What? That had to be fake. But then I looked at Mom, and that look on her face, she was falling for Grandma's lie. And just then, Granny called my fake psycho mom into the room to testify against me too. Yes, she's my daughter. She has a habit of stealing and running away from home, and she keeps having these hallucinations. OMG, how can you even say that? And for what? Money? You're disgusting. Yeah, that's how she acts up all the time. But I have the nurses with me, and we're gonna take her away, don't you worry. What? No! Mom, please, don't listen to any of them. They are all lying. I wasn't stealing, and I am your daughter. I even have the proof. I ran to my room to get the actual DNA tests and showed them to Mom. She looked super confused, but just as those nurses were about to take me, she stepped forward. "No, that's enough. Don't touch my daughter. Get your filthy hands off her." "But Mom, she hit me and broke my hand." "Yeah, liar. The same hand with which I saw you eating like a pig in the kitchen." Mom looked raging mad. She asked everyone to leave and took me back to my room. "Mom, I swear." "It's okay. You don't need to tell me anything. Just sleep for now." She put me to sleep and went away. But soon after, Granny came into my room with my fake mother. "You're so evil. Why did you lie to her?" "Because I want to get rid of you like I did 14 years ago." "But why?" "Because you were her love child. If word had gotten out, it would have ruined her reputation. I had to protect her. So you gave me away? Your own grandchild? Grandchild. You're just a filthy rat. Enough. I can't believe you'd do that, Mom. How could you? But I didn't. No. Stop lying. Stop saying that you do things for me. You kept my own child away from me for all these years and let me think that she was dead? You're mean and evil, and you do everything for your own sake, Mom. Just get out. Get out of my house right now. Mom threw Grandma out of the house and gave my fake mom away to the police for lying and keeping me away from my mother all those years. Oh, honey, are you okay? I'm fine, Mom, and I'm so glad you believe me. Of course, honey. I lost you once, and I can't let that happen again. And I'm sorry you had to go through all that, but I promise I'll make it up to you. And I will always love you. I love you too, Mom.
I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. It was 4 a.m. My heart was beating fast as I hurried out of my room. I hate you! I don't want you in my life, you jerk! I froze. That was my mom's voice, but she didn't normally sound like that. My parents often fought, but this time it was different, and it scared me. Goodbye, George! She shouted, and I heard the front door slam. Wait, did she actually leave? I ran downstairs as fast as I could. Mommy, please don't leave! I screamed as I opened the door. She was already in the cab. I was sure she'd wait for me, but she didn't. Our eyes met as she gazed at me through the window, and in just a few seconds, she was gone. Watching the cab leave seemed like a dream. Everything was moving in slow motion, and my vision started to go dark. Suddenly, I felt my dad's arms holding me as I fell down onto my knees. He was shaking uncontrollably. We held each other tightly until the sun came up. Mila, are you awake? I'm asking a simple question. Why does a mother bear hide her children from their father? My teacher was angry. There was silence. I didn't want to answer. I don't know, ask someone else, I shouted. The whole class stared at me in shock. I stormed out and slammed the door behind me. I knew I was getting detention, but that was the least of my worries. I was seeing the flashbacks. The memory of the last day I'd seen Linda began haunting me once again. I blame Jason for it, my boyfriend, who's always pushing me to talk about my feelings. He kept nagging me to tell him what had happened until I had enough of it. To be honest, I couldn't reveal to him that my own mother had left me 10 years ago without so much as a goodbye or an explanation. So I lied and told him she had passed away from a disease. Jason seemed to pity me, but his sorrow meant nothing. Even if I told him the truth, he wouldn't realize how I really felt, abandoned. I waited outside for my driver, Andrew, to come pick me up. Andrew was like a father to me. He always listened to my problems. Sometimes it felt like we had a better relationship than the one I had with my dad. As soon as I got into the car, Andrew informed me that my father wanted to have a talk with me. It seemed strange as my dad never asked to have a talk, not even when I did terrible things at school. When I walked into the living room, my father looked devastated. Hey Dad, did the school call? I swear I can explain. I started nervously. But then my father covered his face and started to cry. Feeling really worried now, I asked him what was going on. His reply completely shook me. Mila, it's Linda. She's back and she wants to take you away from me. Completely taken aback, I just stood speechless as Dad went on to explain that she had finally filed for divorce after 10 years and was demanding full custody of me. The world felt like it was spinning. My mother? That's impossible. Why now? I clenched my teeth. I hated her guts. I went over to my dad, and even though it felt a bit awkward, I hugged him and promised that there was no way I would ever abandon him to go live with her. You're my only family, Dad. We'll get through this together. The date for the divorce trial arrived. My father and his lawyers had prepared me well on what to say. I wasn't really nervous about going to court, but the idea of seeing Linda after 10 years kept me on edge. What would she look like now? Would I be able to recognize her? I was going to keep hating her, of course, but a part of me was kind of excited to see her. When I went inside the courtroom and looked around, she wasn't there. I thought she'd show up at some point, but she didn't. It was just the lawyers. I couldn't believe that she'd be this heartless. After 10 years, she didn't even make the effort to show up in court. As the trial went on, things just got worse. Linda's lawyer claimed that my dad was an unfit parent who kept my mother away from me by force. They also claimed that my father was involved in some serious illegal activity and should be in jail. On top of that, they made it very clear that they had evidence to prove it. After the court session, I was shocked when my father pulled me aside and admitted that he had stolen money from his company. It was a long time ago, but it could still send him to jail. He went on to say that he only started doing those things because Linda had left him. Life had been so cruel to him. and he had temporarily stopped caring about right and wrong. I'm not proud of it, but it was your mother's fault, he said, looking ashamed and avoiding making eye contact with me. It's okay, Dad, I stuttered, with tears in my eyes. I can't judge you for what you had to go through. I will stay by your side and help however I can. My dad went silent for a while, but then he said, there's actually something you could do. There is? He told me that Linda's lawyer had suggested that I spend the week with her, and if I agreed to it, I could help my dad find the evidence she had against him. I immediately agreed, even though it kind of scared me. Spending a week with the mother I hated sounded like a trip to hell. But I had to save my dad. As soon as we got home, I packed my bag and sent a message to Jason telling him I would be away for a few days. Linda sent a cab to pick me up, and apparently she had moved back to the city. When I arrived at her house, I was shocked to see that she was staying in a huge villa. My heart stopped for a second when I saw her waiting for me outside. I hated to admit it, but after 10 years, she still looked beautiful. She greeted me with tears in her eyes and said, "Welcome home, honey." She hugged me tightly for a very long time. All I could think was, if she missed me that much, she should have shown up a little sooner. Linda showed me around the house as she explained that we'd have a lot of time to argue about the past. For now, she just wanted us to relax and get to know each other. I mean, sure, let's just skip over the fact that you were gone for 10 years and act like a normal mother and daughter, I thought, but didn't bother to argue. I was here on a mission, to get rid of her for good. The next few days were a bit of a nightmare. I wanted a little time by myself to snoop around the place, but my mom was stuck to me like a magnet on a fridge. Every time I thought I had a chance to look through a drawer or closet, there she was with a tray of freshly baked cookies, asking me to come try one while they were still hot, or asking me to go on a walk with her. As it was such a lovely day, it was always one thing or another. The only option I was left with was to try looking for the documents at night when she was asleep. On my third night at her house, I crept out of my room and looked down the corridor. The room in her light was off. Good. I quietly went down the stairs and headed straight to the library. I was really hoping I'd find a folder or something there. As soon as I turned the doorknob, oh my God, make that terrible screeching stop! I just stood there completely in shock as alarms blared all around me. In a matter of seconds, my mom had come running down and switched all the lights on. She had a baseball bat in her hand, and she looked pretty scary. "Mila, oh thank God, I thought it was a break-in," she said as she lowered the bat. I stammered, trying to think of something quickly. I couldn't sleep. I thought I'd just come downstairs and grab a book to read. "Don't do that again, Mila. It would be better if you didn't leave your room at all at night," she said in a quiet voice. I just nodded and headed off to bed without saying another word. Okay, that was really creepy. Other than the fact that I was completely failing at my mission, I eventually found myself having a good time with her. I didn't want to like her, but I couldn't help myself. She was charming and funny. It would have been nice growing up with her around. The thought made me really angry too, and gave me the urge to confront her, but it wasn't the right time. My father was my priority, and I had to stick to the mission. On the last day of my stay, I was very nervous. My time here was about to end, and I still hadn't found the evidence. "Mila?" I jumped as Linda shouted from upstairs. "Can you get me some shampoo? I'm in the shower." I went into her room and handed her the bottle from behind the door. But as I was heading out, I noticed something that looked like a folder peeking out of the drawer near her bed. My eyes widened as I opened it. These were the documents I'd been looking for all week. I grabbed the folder and hurried outside with my packed bag. Andrew came to pick me up in seconds, and he started asking questions, but I refused to tell him why I was upset. I stared at the house with tears in my eyes as he drove off. I would have had a nice life, if only it were real. When I arrived home, my father greeted me with the joy of victory. "You're my little hero," he said as he looked through the documents I gave him. After my return, the court arrangements stopped abruptly. Linda knew that I'd taken the evidence, and she had nothing to go to court with. Now that my father was safe and my manipulative mother was no longer an issue, I thought things would be different between my dad and I. But I was wrong. The truth was, I couldn't blame him. How could he love me when I reminded him so much of her? After a few days, I was unpacking the bag I had with me at Linda's when I noticed an envelope inside. I opened it with shaking hands as I read my mother's words. "Dear Mila, in case we part ways before I get a chance to speak to you, I want you to give me one last chance. Go to your father's office. He has a secret drawer near his desk on the bottom left side. That's where he hides all of his secrets. You must remember, there are two sides to every story. Love, Mom." My heart started racing. How did she slip the note inside my bag? Suddenly, I heard loud knocking at the front door. Oh God, it was her. "Open the door right now." You scared the hell out of me." I shouted at Jason as he walked in, looking a bit angry. I scared you? You're the one who disappeared for 2 weeks. What is going on with you? I handed him the note and confessed that my mother was alive. His jaw dropped. I promised I would explain everything, but first I needed his help in finding my dad's secret drawer while he was still out. We both went to my father's office. We looked around for the secret place for a long time before we found it. What we found was shocking. Hundreds of old envelopes with my name on them. The envelopes seemed as if they belonged to a fake magazine subscription. As soon as I opened one, I found that they were secret letters from my mother. Quickly, I took everything out of the drawer and we ran to my room. I quickly told Jason everything about my past and what had been going on lately. As I started reading the notes, I couldn't stop. There was so much information to process. I started to understand a lot of things. How my mother was kicked out of the house, how my dad forbade her from ever contacting me, and how he even threatened her and demanded that she move to another state. She had left him after she found out that he was embezzling money. She wanted me to go with her, but my father was a very powerful man, and he knew dangerous people. She couldn't do anything about it. Just then, I heard a loud knock on my door. It was my dad. Quickly, I slid all the notes under my bed and pretended to kiss Jason. I needed to hide what I was actually doing. My dad opened the door and said angrily, "What is this?" I moved away from Jason and saw to my horror that my father had a letter in his hand. He must have dropped one by accident. My father smiled, and I felt a shiver down my spine. "You stupid girl. You just opened the gates of hell. Don't talk to her like that," Jason warned him. My father started laughing like a lunatic. "At least I can tell you now how much I hate you. You're just a copy of your terrible mother. I guess it's time that you know that the only reason I've kept you around was to make her suffer." I stood still as a statue as I tried to process what was happening. I remembered the way he was crying when Mom left. That was all an act? Jason grabbed my hand and said, "Mila, grab your stuff. We're leaving." I gathered my things quickly. I wasn't going to live with this monster anymore. I didn't even know who he was. "You can't leave," he laughed. "You're still in my custody. I'll have the police bring you back soon." He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, blocking our way. "It's too bad that you think the police will return her to a monster like you," Jason said, shoving him aside as we stormed out. Jason's car was outside. We got in fast and drove off. "This isn't over," my dad shouted. Shocked at what had just happened, I hugged Jason and told him I was sorry he had to witness all this drama and that I wished I'd told him the truth sooner. He wiped away my tears and said he was just glad he'd helped me get out of my evil father's clutches. Jason dropped me off at my mother's where she was waiting at the door, as if she were expecting me. I went inside quickly. My whole body was shaking. My life was a lie. For 10 years I despised my mother, while the real enemy was him. "He's gonna come for me, Mom," I said, shivering. "I know him. He won't let it go. He's gonna hurt us both, Mom." I was scared to death. "I won't let him, honey. I've been preparing for this." She held my hand tightly. Life with him was a nightmare from the start. Not only was he cheating on me, I found out that he was a criminal and a very dangerous man. I started to secretly gather evidence against him, but when he found out, I had to leave. I always wanted to come back to you, but he always had people looking for me to find the proof I had and destroy it. I was always on the run. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I had no idea you..." Before I could finish my sentence, the house alarm went off. "He's here," my mom said calmly. I hurried to call the police, but it was too late. My dad had already broken in with 2 of his men. "Oh, Linda, it's such a pleasure to finally see you after all these years. Boys, why don't we give her a nice welcome gesture, eh?" The 2 men grabbed my mother by the arms. "I'm not scared of you if that's what you think," my mom said, daring him. My dad came closer to her, smiling. He placed his hand gently around her neck and said, "You know what I'm capable of, Linda. Don't test me." "What if I do?" she said with a smile. My mother was acting insane. "I will finish you," my father said, not smiling this time, as he started to tighten his hand around her neck. "Father, no!" I cried while trying to get him off of her, but he was too strong. All of a sudden, everything went completely dark, and I felt my body hit the floor. I saw Andrew coming in before I lost consciousness. "Hey, honey, are you okay?" my mom said with her soft voice. "She's alive, but how?" I looked around, and the police officers were all over the place. My father and his men were nowhere to be seen, and one of the investigators was speaking with Andrew. "What is Andrew doing here?" I asked. "Did you really think I would leave you without making sure someone was watching over you?" Mom said. Andrew looked over at us. "Glad to see you 2 back together," he said with a wink. I was speechless. The only thing I could do was hug my mom and cry. I was so glad she was okay.
Andrew came along and joined us. I couldn't thank him enough for what he did for me. As for my father, he was going to be behind bars for a good long time. If he were to come back for revenge one day, my mom and I were strong enough to face him. He didn't scare me anymore, but I do know him well. He said this wasn't over, and he's a man of his word.